Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Gaming with me, Tony Mo, and we're here today to take a look at The Division's Underground DLC, bringing you guys my first impressions of the first pace of Premium DLC. No idea where that accent just came from. The first piece of Premium DLC for The Division. So I think we're looking at a $15 price point. Of course, if you decided to purchase the Season Pass, you'll gain access to it instantly. Unfortunately, the reason that this video is so late, I would have actually liked to do this day one, is that much like all of the other updates for The Division, free patches, whatever, the Underground DLC launched with a handful of issues preventing people from actually playing it. There were server issues, there was, problems with it showing up in people's libraries. I, for one, had, an 8 GB install and then had to go and manually install the DLC itself, which was a bit silly. So, unfortunately, still tons of small bugs and glitches plaguing everything surrounding anything that launches in The Division. Fortunately, they seem to clean it up very quickly, at least in my experience and the experience of the several other people that I talked to. About a day later, everything was all good to go, and I was able to hop into the game and give it a go for myself. Now, really early impressions, I was impressed that they decided to tie in a little bit of a story to the unlocking of the new location under the base of operations, and in general, kind of put a story behind why you're going underground. It sucks that there isn't more of that. It only exists for basically the first 2 missions. You have a mission that actually happens outside in the city, which has you going to find out what's happened with some quarantine zones. Turns out, somebody's escaped from the quarantine, and of course it turns out that there's like Rikers and LMB behind all of it. So there's a bit of a battle there. You end up picking up the cell phone of an LMB boss, which then leads you to the underground, and this all of a sudden, unlocks this whole crazy base of operations under the base of operations, and this is where you launch everything regarding the Underground DLC. Now, they've also added an additional hub outside of that area, so I don't know, it feels a bit redundant, and the worst part is if you go to walk to that area from the regular base of operations, you have to slow walk, and it's one of the longest walks ever, so I strongly recommend that you fast travel directly to where you want to be to gain access to the Underground DLC. Now, we have a bunch of new vendors down there. There are vendors specifically for the Underground DLC. There's going to be new blueprints. They've also, of course, added a slew of new weapons to the game. So we've got like G36 models, PPV-19s, there's an SVD, and a handful of other ones. So there's new weapons and, of course, new equipment, plus the new gear sets to unlock with this DLC. Now, the first thing I want to point out is that the Underground DLC gives you an additional area to earn levels. So much like the Dark Zone, you now have a separate rank for the Underground. Some people are going to like this, some people are going to hate this. It's an obvious way to create more progression in the game. But what it means is that in order to access any of the blueprints or equipment from the Underground vendor, you'll need to actually reach certain levels. I find this slightly frustrating, but I'm also okay with it. I like the idea of leveling up, but that's only because of what I'm going to say about the Underground DLC after this, and the fact that I actually quite enjoy what they've put on here. But I think a lot of people who have been playing the game for a very long period of time are just like, really? I've got to get another 30 levels in a completely different category just to unlock these new weapons, these new pieces of equipment that are offered down here in the Underground. It's a little bit frustrating, but you have to recognize that that is just the stuff from the vendor, and you're actually getting a lot of loot drops. You're going to be getting really good loot if you play the game on a more challenging difficulty. Everything that I've experienced was just me soloing on the normal difficulty. Pretty much just getting a hang of it all and getting a feel for how these dungeons were actually put together. Now, this very first mission that you guys are seeing right here, obviously not a lot of combat going on. This is a unique mission. This is the very first time you go into the Underground DLC, and it's a mission set up specifically to introduce you into the Underground DLC, to tell you the story. You're tracking down essentially the GPS data from the cell phone that leads you to an LMB hideout. This was all really impressive, and it's unfortunate that the remainder of the DLC doesn't function this way. You still have the randomly generated locations, and I have to say that I am quite impressed with the overall atmosphere of the Underground DLC. I think it's freaking awesome. They really did a good job with the level design here. We're seeing a lot of new design elements. Parts of the Underground do open up. It had almost a Metro feel to it, dare I say. You know, definitely not the same level of despair that you see in a game like Metro 2033, but I think they captured the underground quite well. There's some really cool stuff going on with like some of the larger opening door areas that are locked off, and if you really pay attention to that stuff, it's obvious that they put some pretty serious work into that, and I really like the way that all of that came together. Now, one of the things you guys are seeing right here is one of the new elements that you're going to have to deal with in the Underground DLC. This is a skill jammer. So this jams all of your abilities apart from grenades and medkits. I believe it also jammed my ability to swap cover, which I thought was kind of interesting. Here's the issue that I've experienced with these things so far, as well as some of the traps. They're simply not deadly enough. They're way too easy to eliminate, and in all of the cases in which I've ran into them, they were very exposed. The enemy, you know, took no effort to hide them, and I think anyone who is a veteran Division player will know that this is an issue that the game has had with any sort of environmental-based defense system. So in a lot of the daily missions that we're dealing with, like the LMB, you know, we have those turrets that are set up. You know, they put the control boxes, like, in the most obvious areas. They're not, you know, contained behind any sort of cover. They're not defended by any LMB. You simply walk up to them, press a button, and deactivate the turret before you were even in its line of sight, in almost all of the instances. That seems to be the same problem, at least in the 3 missions that I played down in the Underground DLC, is that the traps and things of that nature just aren't really ever in an area where they ever cause you more than a couple seconds worth of harm. And I was playing alone. Imagine playing with 4 people where someone can easily outflank the enemy while the other 3 players distract them and eliminate these different objectives. You'll notice right here we've got an alarm. Super obvious, facing me. There was, you know, no real difficulty in eliminating that alarm and making sure that I didn't have to deal with any more enemy threats. These are all great ideas. I like the idea of the skill jammer and the alarm system and the traps, but they're executed poorly, and part of that issue also goes hand in hand with the fact that there's really only one level of engagement in the Division, and that is go loud. You don't really have any stealth mechanics, so something like the alarm makes no sense. You know, when I think of an alarm system like that, I think of the outposts in Far Cry, which are great. You know, I love the outposts in Far Cry. They're extremely well designed, and, you know, seeing how long you can stealth or trying to sneak up and eliminate the alarms before you engage the enemy or go loud is a lot of fun. That's not the case in the Division. It's pretty much just find the alarm and make that your first opportunity to go loud, and hopefully the enemy hasn't spotted you by then, because there are no stealth mechanics within the Division. You know, equipping a suppressor does very little to hide your presence from the enemy. So that's a bit unfortunate. You know, again, I think great little design elements, but they falter because of the core design of the Division. They just don't really work with the game. I imagine that they will cause some flux and issue on the harder difficulties when you're dealing with more troublesome enemies where it's not as easy to push forward and deactivate things like the skill jammer. So I like that they've been included, but they have little effect on the normal and hard difficulty modes, especially if you play with a group of players. And I know that's a big part of the Underground DLC, were those little traps and things of that nature. So again, it's a little bit upsetting that they weren't more effectively implemented. Now, what I was talking about with this level in particular, we know that all of the levels are randomly generated inside of the Underground DLC. That's obviously awesome. It gives you a different experience, or at least a slightly different experience every time you go in. You'll be dealing with different enemy types, Rikers, LMB, the traps, and the devices like the skill jammer will be located in different locations. And, you know, of course, you have that different layout. But this particular mission, as I said, is specifically, at least it's seemingly specifically designed to take you into an enemy stronghold, the LMB Base of Operations. This mission was really, really freaking cool, and it set a high standard for the rest of the Underground DLC that unfortunately just doesn't exist. You know, we have the random laid out stuff, we have the combat engagements, that stuff's all really fine and dandy, but jump forward here, and you notice that I'm starting to make my way back into more of the story elements. You know, we're hearing pre-recorded voice from the LMB officer that I took down previously above ground, and that's how we're making our way into their base. And look at this. Look at this, man. This is so incredibly cool. I love what they've done with this. You know, we've got crazy neon paint, UV lights everywhere. This is their, you know, sort of creepy little hangout. We've got a skate, you know, we got a vert ramp going on over here. You know, this is the thing I would expect to see from this sort of potentially youth culture that's living underground. You know, it's obvious that the LMB has kind of taken over this. And you'll notice that in bits and pieces of the Underground DLC, you actually run into civilians that are still alive. The LMB will even show up to help you, and it's a little bit upsetting that they didn't take that a bit further. You know, I think a lot of people wanted to see more story component from the Underground DLC, and there's a lot of missed opportunities to really deliver on that. But I love this little location. It almost reminds me of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, the first one, where all the kids have, you know, this sort of crazy hangout, and there's like, you know, skate ramps, and you got any smokes? You know, regular menthol. That's not that big of a TMNT nerd. I totally remember most of the lines from that movie, but I love the vibe that this gave across. And again, this is really the only opportunity where you run into that. Now, there may be certain missions down the line where you're set to take out maybe a different boss based on intel that you gather after you complete more runs in the Underground DLC, but I don't know. This is all I experienced first from you know, my first run in. And then the two missions that I did after this normal mode didn't include any sort of, you know, unique area like this. So as I said, I think this was primarily set up to introduce the Rikers hideout, I'm sorry, not the LMB, and the story, and get things really flowing. So lots of missed opportunities in this DLC. That's the big thing for me. You know, there was a lot of opportunity, I think, to tell more story, to get people more involved with the survivors that exist underground. Really, it's just a randomly generated dungeon affair. And I would be okay with that, you know, and I am okay with that. I'm not going to downplay the Underground DLC completely. I do think it's a lot of fun. I think if you're still playing The Division, there's a lot of reasons to play it. I particularly enjoy the amount of loot that you get in the Underground DLC. So not only are you going to get loot from the boss that you kill, you're going to get a cache for completing the mission, and there's also a chest available at the end of each mission, or end of each Underground DLC run that will also give you additional loot. So there's a lot of opportunities to get loot here, and the more you play, the more you level up, the better the odds of the better the quality of the loot you're going to get. Of course, you're going to be able to unlock the skill modifiers as you increase your rank. You're going to be able to take on harder difficulty stuff, you know, as you level up your gear score, as you bring other people into the play, and you'll be able to get better loot. So I like what they've done with this. I think it is a solid piece of PvE content. But there was just a part of me that wanted to see more awesome stuff like we're seeing here in this very first mission. You know, if every single run of the Underground DLC could feature some sort of unique, you know, boss-like arena area, I think that would be wicked awesome. But most of the runs that I've done have included a boss that just shows up in the middle of a standard subway, you know, segment of the randomly generated environment. You kill him, and that's pretty much it. If these happen to show up, you know, maybe as you hit certain levels or something like that, that would be fantastic. You know, I really can't testify to that in terms of my first impressions, but to me, this added a lot to the experience for my first run. And if this didn't exist, I would have thought a bit less of the Underground DLC early on. You know, I would have just been like, oh yeah, I'm just killing stuff. But this was a really great setup. This definitely hooked me on the DLC. Again, that atmosphere, just the overall presence of it all was really exciting. You know, and it definitely grabbed my attention, and it, you know, it resulted in me running more of the missions than I probably would have otherwise. So if you're someone who's actively playing The Division, is this going to be a great piece of DLC for you? Hell yeah. I would, you know, definitely recommend dropping the cash on it if you're still actively playing. There's a lot of content here. There's new weapons, new equipment to unlock. It's more of The Division. Like I said, it's unfortunate that the mechanics, like the skill jammer and the traps, weren't more well executed, because I think that's the sort of thing that we need to see moving forward for combat from the Division, is ways to refresh it, ways to make it feel more alive rather than just throwing more bullet sponges into different locations and different environments. So it's unfortunate that those things didn't pan out and perform as well as I think many of us wanted them to, but I still think if you're actively playing the Division, this is worth every penny. However, if you're someone like myself who has since stepped away, who doesn't have a season pass, I don't know that there's really a reason to come back and drop the cash unless you're completely out of games to play right now, which I doubt is the case. There's a lot of other stuff to play right now that is going to provide you with a more valuable in-the-moment value experience. There you have it, guys. That's my first impressions of The Division's Underground DLC. You know, I want to see this game grow and evolve. I think the Underground DLC was a chance to do something bigger that they sort of squandered. Do I think it's enjoyable? Is it great for people that are actively playing? Yes, but it's not the sort of shift in gameplay mechanics and, you know, a change in what we expect from the Division's core gunplay that I was really hoping for. If you guys have any questions for me, any thoughts of your own regarding the Division's Underground DLC, feel free to throw it down in the comments section below. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one.